Okay, hello everyone and welcome to our webinar using slow PR to avoid the 16 fatal flaws of media pitching, brought to you by Wasabi, Publicity and PitchRate.com. This is our final event in a three-part media pitching series. My name is Hannah Collison, Client Services at Wasabi, and I will be moderating our webinar today. Okay, on to our agenda. Our webinar today will last approximately 1 hour. That's 30 to 45 minutes of presenting and then some time for Q&A. We'll start with introductions before our presenters quickly review the 16 pitching flaws that they covered in webinars 1 and 2. Please also feel free to chat about this series in social media using the hashtags media pitching and slow PR. After that review, Michelle and Michael will define the slow PR movement, and they will discuss the principles of slow PR, and then we'll take your questions. In a moment, I'll hand you over to Michelle Tennant, but first let me just tell you who she is. With 24 years of global PR experience, Michelle Tennant Nicholson has seen PR transition from typewriters to Twitter. She is co-owner and Chief Creative Officer of Wasabi Publicity, a firm recognized by the Associated Press, Christian Science Monitor, PR Week, and Good Morning America for unique business leadership. Michelle specializes in breaking news and has been called a 5-star publicist by Good Morning America producer Mabel Chan. Let me give you a peek into her world. Yesterday, her team scored the Today Show. Last week, the Fox Radio. Last month, WGN, this summer, Inc., and in the spring, Oprah. National media such as the Wall Street Journal, Larry King Live, CNN, BBC, Fox, NBC, ABC, Dr. Phil, and more all rely on Michelle for sources and story ideas. Michelle blogs about PR at storytellertothemedia.com, and due to her master's degree in human development, she contributes to the Huffington Post's GPS for the Soul section in a blog called The Art of Aha, How to Find Health, Wealth, and Love in the 21st Century. Hi, Michelle.
Hi. That's so great. Thank you so much for introducing me, Hannah. Yeah, so I am really looking forward to summarizing the first and second webinars and really getting into the heart of what slow PR is today. But first, I'd like to introduce to you Mikal Belicove, whom we're just so glad can actually spend some time with us so that you can learn exactly what slow PR is and also the fatal flaws of media pitching. So let me tell you who he is. Mikal Belicove is a magazine columnist, book author, and blogger who writes about entrepreneurship, marketing, business planning, corporate communications, emerging technologies, legal issues, and more. The third edition of his latest co-authored book, The Complete Idiot's Guide to Facebook, was published last fall. Michael writes the Ask a Geek column for Entrepreneur Magazine, the Business End blog for Forbes Magazine, the EdTech Matters column for Today's Campus Magazine, and is a contributing writer to NewHope360.com. Previously, Michael launched, managed, and sold a Boulder, Colorado-based internet startup. He worked in acquisitions for John Wiley & Sons and Pearson and worked in a variety of staff and executive team roles for startups and a variety of not-for-profit organizations. A 1986 graduate of Keystone College and a member of Keystone College's Board of Trustees, when he's not working, Michael can be found dreaming about training for half marathons while trail running and enjoying life with family and friends in Las Vegas, Nevada. So as you can see, a person with tremendous experience for us today. Welcome, Michael.
Thanks, Michelle. But I'm waiting for the webinar about health, wealth, and love.
Oh, yeah. Stay tuned.
The one that Hannah mentioned, your focus of what you write for over at Huffington. Can we maybe flip the topic a little bit? I'd like to focus on that.
It's something that I dangle out in front of the media every day and have for 20 plus years, and I've got a master's degree in it. So I finally said, you know what? I'm going to share some of what I've learned through the years through the art of AHA. Topics of health, wealth, and love. So stay tuned for that. I appreciate you noticing that. So let's talk a little bit.
Lives.
What did you say?
We all have multifaceted lives.
It's true, and I bet everybody on the phone, too, or people seeing this in the future, this webinar online, you know, that right there, the jack of all trades, that type of vast skill set, it can become abuse to the relationships that you build, and we're going to really get into that today. So make note, maybe even like jot down some ideas as we're talking for yourself. But before we get into slow PR, let's talk about what we talked about in the first two webinars. And if you'd like to review those, I've got on our slide right now how you can see the replays. There's some bit.ly links right there. So you can see, you know, media pitching 1, media pitching 2, and those are each a little bit over an hour, and you'll definitely want to check those out when you have time. Now let's review the 16 pitching flaws. Michael?
Yeah, so the first one is referencing someone else's coverage of the exact same news that you're pitching me about. And I should actually step back for a second and just say for the record that all of the thoughts and opinions that are shared today and on the other two webinars are my personal thoughts and opinions about the relationship between public relations and media. As a journalist, I don't speak on behalf of any of the publications that I write for, but over the years, these are things that I've noticed as flaws when you're pitching me, and other journalists that I've talked to when I go to conferences and different networking opportunities have experienced and expressed some of the same. So the first one, referencing someone else's coverage of the exact same news. Here, a lot of people will try to justify their pitch by telling me that their client was recently featured in the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, or another publication. And they probably think that by telling me that I'll take the news more seriously and want to jump on that bandwagon. But the truth is that telling me about someone else's coverage of the same news story you're pitching me makes me want to run in the opposite direction, because I don't want to write what someone else has already written, and I feel like you've prioritized me improperly. In other words, you should have come to me first rather than to the New York Times or whomever else it is that you're lauding. Second one, assuming I care, this really goes to pitching me before asking what's on my editorial calendar, what my focus is, and what I need in order to do my job and stay in the good graces of my editors. And so oftentimes I'll get pitches either by phone or by email or even in person, where the person that's pitching just kind of launches in, and it's very clear to me that they don't understand what my focus is. And so almost everything else that comes from them I kind of assume is going to be the same. So third one, not referencing supporting data. What I call a kind of a PR hack, someone who's just sort of stepped into the PR role, is more prone to doing this than either an entrepreneur would be, a business owner, or someone who's been in PR for a while, but making wild claims in a pitch or a press release about being the best-selling or the most popular without backing it up with some third-party data. That, I feel, is definitely a misstep as far as I'm concerned, because you're tying your claim to a recognizable, or you're not tying your claim to a recognizable or trusted source, and you're asking me to jump through a pretty big hoop to think that what you're telling me is actually true. So just backing it up with some basic information and supporting data always helps. Crying wolf, if you're too young to remember Aesop's fables, the boy who cried wolf, look it up and read it. It's fairly straightforward. And the issue here is sending a press release or a pitch for every little thing that's happening in the life of your client is viewed as crying wolf. And as a result, we don't know what truly is news and what isn't news, because it seems like all you're doing is putting everything out as breaking news. Number 5, remaining mum on your competitors. This is one where I often run into when I'm running a rundown story about a particular piece of technology or a type of company or a particular vertical, when the subject matter that I'm interviewing as the primary source for the piece absolutely refuses to tell me who their competitors are. It just annoys me, quite frankly. And it's even worse when they say we don't have any competitors. The notion being, of course, what they do is so different from what everybody else does. But the fact is that there's a pretty common thread running through almost everything. And it's always best to just kind of answer that question, because it actually helps the journalist do their job a little bit better if they're writing a rundown piece. Guerrilla distribution of your press releases. The issue here is that it's really easy for business owners or a PR agency to cast a super wide net for press releases. You know, there are any number of options that are available. Myself, I don't like it when you distribute your news that way, because it dilutes whatever I may end up publishing on account of the particular press release that you are distributing, because it's going to appear in multiple locations online, and that ultimately may actually trump my handcrafted article in the search engines. And as you'll see a little bit later, the way that journalists are being compensated nowadays and probably well into the future is often through eyeballs. And so that actually competes with what we're trying to do. Leading with rhetoric and hyperbole, this one is just fairly straightforward. You don't want to do it because as journalists, we're skeptical, and you're going to lose credibility right off the bat if you're just not talking about facts.
So, and then, Michael, I wondered if you were not giving me enough time lead, if we're moving through that. Do you want me, I'm going to go ahead and speak a little bit about that.
Actually, I apologize. My computer just shut off, and so I actually don't have access to the screen right now. So
okay. You know what? I'm going to talk a little bit about not giving me enough lead time, because I can really, that is definitely something that I've interacted, and then you want to take care of your computer real quick?
I don't think I'm going to be able to turn it back on. So
oh, okay.
If you can just kind of prompt me.
I'll guide you through the conversation. So, but we did skip over not giving me enough lead time. So, what do you talk a little bit about that?
Not giving me enough lead time is the notion that everything that you have to share and say is in the moment, and it's really, really important now. And what you're doing there is you're not giving me time to actually write about that topic. So, for example, if you embargo the content to me, if you give it to me 3 or 4 days ahead of time before you drop that press release, I have the opportunity to do some research and to get ready to report on that news before it becomes 100% newsworthy or before it actually drops in the press. So giving me enough lead time definitely is something that's important for me as well.
And people, remember that it's different for every type of journalist. So with a magazine, it might be 3 to 6 months lead, and then for TV, it might be even the day before, or newspapers need 2 weeks. You need to check in with your media contacts to be sure. So how about operating without a media distribution list?
Yeah, this one is fairly obvious to me when I see it. The issue here is simply that when you're guerrilla distributing your content and your pitch, sort of starts off with "Dear Mikal Belicove," I know that it's not custom. I know that you're probably pitching it to 40, 50, 60 different people, even more, maybe 600, 700 different people, and it definitely impacts how serious I'm going to take the information that you're pitching in my direction.
And in this one, you talked a little bit about the Matthew effect and not recognizing the Matthew effect. I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, so the Matthew effect is it's a biblical reference, and the issue here is that there's a passage in the Bible that talks to the notion that the rich get richer, and that we actually perpetuate that. So often what happens is I'll continually hear about the same person or the same organization that's being the front leader, and there's like this piling on effect that goes on. While at the same time there are very legitimate and hardworking and intelligent and highly contributive experts that aren't getting the light of day in news stories. So when I see the same organizations constantly being pitched over and over again, or the same experts, that tells me that they've got a great PR team on their side, and that there really is a good story there because the media is picking up on it. It's kind of feeding itself. I want to give other people an opportunity to gain access to the limelight. That's just sort of my approach, and so I'm likely to look towards other sources than the one that's constantly being promoted over and over again. And I know a number of other journalists that feel the same way.
Well, in 11 and 12, you might actually combine those if you'd like. Ignoring capacity, which would be your capacity, and then pitching without cover. So it's really like the direct interaction with, writers like yourself.
Yeah, so ignoring capacity, just realizing that, I may only be able to pump out, let's say if it's 1 article a day, and you as a PR rep are continuing to pound me to try to get content out of me on behalf of your client. Just recognizing that I only have so much capacity is important, and approaching that relationship with some sensitivity. And then the pitching without cover has to do with social media. And the issue here is that many people have been led to believe that it's okay to go ahead and tweet out a pitch on an open airway like Twitter or on Facebook, where people who are following me might actually see that pitch. I personally don't appreciate that because it sort of shares the news before I have an opportunity to write about it. And I like to keep my editorial calendar a little bit close to my vest rather than give other journalists and even my readership sort of a peek into what I'm working on. I want to release it on my time frame. And when you pitch openly through social channels, it takes away that element for me, which isn't very endearing to my process.
It's also a place where people troll for ideas. So,
yeah.
If you haven't already found that out, when you're posting and your need for help, you want to make sure, and I have plenty of private contacts, freelancers who write and just say, I just need you to ask a few people personally rather than broadcast that,
Mm-hmm.
So now we've got talking about, insisting being on the call, insisting you be on the call with your client when I interview them. So this would be for a publicist. Of course, if you're the one being interviewed, it wouldn't apply to you. And then also dictating how you write. That's 13 and 14, Michael.
Yeah, so the issue here is that I will run into this quite often where the PR rep will insist that they're on the call with the client. And the reason why I don't like that sometimes is because the PR person will attempt to control that interview. And so I might ask a question, and then the PR person will come in and answer it for the source. And that, in my mind, is never a good situation. It's a real turnoff. And most of the time, it's not an issue, but just to be aware that some journalists may not appreciate that. And then, I'm sorry, can you tell me the next one again?
Yeah, dictating, like telling you what to write.
Yeah, and that's almost, well, it actually is worse. And you will run into people that don't realize that you need to be unbiased. You need to write it in the way that you need to write it. And where this pops up is where someone wants to give you exclusivity or a first look at a story, and they really want to control the way that story is going to be written. What that suggests to me is that in the past they've been burned, and they feel like every journalist might be approaching them the same way going forward. That's like, driving down the road, holding onto the rearview mirror and using that as your windshield and steering wheel all in one. You're just going to bump into things over time. So keep the past where it belongs and, assume that people have their best interests and your best interests in mind and that they're going to do their job properly.
And I've got some updates, so stay tuned later on in the call. I took some of your coaching, Michael, and I'm going to actually tell you about that, but it's going to be interesting to hear what you have to say about what transpired since webinar number 2 with your past advice to me. So stay tuned, everybody. We'll get to that during the Slow PR section. So this is now asking for unnecessary correction. So it's more about the dictating. So it's already published, and then someone's coming back at you like, hey, this is incorrect. This is not factual. Help people have a litmus test about when to ask for corrections and when not to.
Yeah, and the reason that this has become such an issue is because many organizations nowadays have turned the digital press on inside of their own building, and they have access to content management systems that allow them to change content on the fly. So if they notice an error, a small error in a piece that I've written, maybe it's related to a figure. The correct figure is 1,679, and I've written 1,680. And they'll ask for a correction because the CMS, the content management system, makes it simple to correct. But in my line of work, with the writing that I do for the organizations that I write for, it's actually a hit against me every time I have to go in and correct something. To assume that my editors aren't paying attention, would be kind of silly on my part. So I'm very cautious about what I do go in and correct and focus that time and energy on. And I would just say to anyone who's sort of in that role of PR, just to make sure that if you're asking for a correction, it truly is necessary.
And let me add one more thing to that, because I often tell clients, they don't like what's written, and then I have to say, but is it factual? Is it what you said? And oftentimes, it's not exactly how they like it to be said, but it's factual. Even if the media venue is actually quoting a third party that is maybe speaking about something that, you know, my client may not like, right? And so it's still factual because it's that other person's opinion, right? It's what that other person said, and that's what's being reported on. So we have to remember that, you know, from the media's perspective of maintaining a neutral role, what you might think is incorrect may not look that way for the particular editor. Now, this one I think is like the most revolutionary for me in the 3-part webinar series is the last one. And I cannot even believe that in today's world that people actually refuse to help you socialize your content, Michael. But you said that actually happens sometimes.
Yeah, and the reason why it's so important to journalists nowadays is because the revenue model has changed. As I alluded to earlier, many journalists are being compensated according to the number of views that their content receives. So we're looking for the public relations organizations that have pitched a story to us. We're looking for their support in socializing the article once it's live, socializing the content once it's live through, you know, Twitter, Facebook, the organization's own in the news section of their website, a blog. And the issue here is that we often run into public relations reps who feel like their job is done once the piece has been published. In other words, in their score sheet, they've secured a placement, and that's really all that mattered. And to help do anything beyond that is out of their scope. So I would just say, you know, be a participant throughout the whole process.
That's awesome. And so we're now going to actually, those are the 16 pitching flaws of the review. Frank, I see your question coming in, and you're going to be excited. Frank from D.C. is asking, you know, Michael, well, you talked about how you don't want to be pitched, but how do you want to be pitched? And he's in for a treat because that's the whole next section about slow PR, okay? So let's move right into that. So what is the slow PR movement? Do you want to go ahead and introduce, for those of you who haven't heard of this, it's something that's trending now. We're a little bit before the trend fully, but Michael's going to give you an insight into what it is.
Yeah, so there's where we thought of it ourselves, and it's not something that it can attribute to me or that Michelle can attribute to her organizations. We just kind of codified a few things here from an organization called Slow Money. So the Slow Money movement looks to change the way that money is invested in business, and especially at the local level. And so slowmoney.org, and you can go there to see what they're all about. They encourage investors to invest locally in organic movements, in movements that support local economies, and that bring a certain level of expectation to the investment. Our society needs all kinds of investments. The way that capitalism works in our country, it requires people to move quick, to expect quick returns, to demand certain things of companies, but not in every single case. And so slowmoney.org has developed a number of principles around investing that they encourage their supporters to follow, and they themselves actually have set up a fund, and they provide opportunities for individuals to make investments following these particular principles. So what we've done is we've co-opted some of their principles to translate them a little bit into how they might, how we might think about our approach to public relations. And Michelle, again, I apologize severely.
I mean, hey, technology is either our friend or foe, and in this case, we're just going to make it work, okay?
Yeah.
So the principle number one, principle number one is we must bring money back down to earth, and then the PR translation is we must bring PR back down to earth. And so what does that mean? You know, for everybody out there, they're like, I don't know what that means. Bring it back to earth. Am I supposed to go outside and pitch from, you know, the grass? What does that mean?
It means reasonableness. And a lot of what we're going to be talking about in this slow PR section of today's webinar is almost a lot of it sort of repeating itself, but saying it in different ways so that we can really understand it and fully evaluate if it makes sense for us. So bringing PR back down to earth, it sort of talks to this notion of authenticity and situationalism, where we're attempting as much as possible not to lead with rhetoric, not to do the kinds of things that we pointed out before as being some of the major flaws when you're working with a journalist, or at least when you're working with me, and instead just getting back to being real, having a real conversation with your not only with the journalist that you're working with, but a lot of this really starts with your clients. And making them understand that you can't guarantee results and that you can't promise anything to them necessarily because you don't control what happens on the media side of this equation. All you can do is your best job at providing information that may impact the news reporting cycle and process. So bringing it back down to earth is really embracing authenticity and situationalism. It's not to say that you can't be fast with what you're doing, and there are many cases where fast is absolutely required, and you'd be failing if you weren't fast. But in many cases, sort of the slow nature of it, developing relationships and being authentic and understanding situations and not treating every situation the same is super important.
So while you're listening to Michael, if you're learning something, we'd love for you to post it on Twitter or Facebook or the social media venue of your choice. Hashtag #SlowPR or hashtag media pitching. Again, that's hashtag #SlowPR, hashtag media pitching. And, you know, we have here on the slide service with a smile, and that's one of the things when I work with clients, my team works with clients, we remind clients, hey, you know, in the PR dance with journalists, we're there to serve them. You know, if you wanted to do another type of marketing strategy, that's not what we're talking about with earned editorial coverage. We're talking serving people like you, Michael, and that's, you know, when I think about bringing PR back down to earth, is just to talk straight. You know, and when all else fails inside my relationships and communications, the one thing that I always ground myself with is, okay, are we being authentic, talking straight, and just being real? It kind of reminds me of an old date I had one time where this guy, he's kind of like a hippie type, and he's just like, just be real with me. Just be real with me. So, you know, y'all get it, right? So number 2 is there is this is the slowmoney.org principle that we're going to then translate to PR. So principle number 2 is there is such a thing as money that is too fast, companies that are too big, finance that is too complex. Therefore, we must slow our money down, not all of it, of course, but enough to matter. And in the PR world, it translates into while fast has its place, there is such a thing as PR that is unnecessarily fast. And this is really, really important information, especially for those of you who are using PitchRate.com, because one of the things that we always talk about is the speed of pitching. So when is fast doesn't have its place? So how can we actually discern that, Michael?
Well, it's highly situational, and of course, as a PR pro, you're sitting on a very uncomfortable ledge or fence, if you will. On one side, you have clients that have huge expectations. They usually start with, how come I'm not on Oprah or Dr. Phil or Dr. Oz or something like that, and everything just sort of pales in comparison to that. And on the other side of the fence, you have somebody like me who you're, dependent upon to provide news coverage, which lends legitimacy to whatever that pitch and story is, which hopefully from an earned media standpoint is going to result in whatever kind of conversion, you're accountable for with your client. The slow nature of all of this, again, it just goes back to situationalism. I think the lesson here, or the message here, is simply not to treat everything as if it does have ultimate urgency and that it does have to be fast. It's not so much a matter of providing a list of qualifications for what's slow and what is fast. I think we're all, sort of have the, that level of experience and intelligence to understand that. But treating everything as if it is fast almost goes back to that crying wolf scenario that we were talking about before. Right. Where if you treat everything as if it is a priority, and you're just blasting content out, you're blasting pitches out, you have interns now that are on the phone, that are making calls and doing pitches. What you're doing in a sense is you're telling me that you can't discern between what's timely and what isn't. And, it might be better to spend that time developing a relationship with both with your client and your favorite journalist or your source of journalists or your crew of them, as opposed to just treating everybody, as if they're, an outlet that's supposed to report everything in real time.
And I think that the way you can look at this as far as how it looks in pitches, back to Frank's question about how you like to be pitched, if we're looking at, here, I want to start a relationship with Michael, and I don't know you. And so how do I start a relationship with you? The first thing is to read your work, first be your fan, right? That's an easy step for everybody. Like, okay, well, let's get inside your world, and what kind of writing are you generating in the world? And then come at you from that way, whereas a lot of publicists or people who are trying to get PR for themselves, the do-it-yourselfers, will just immediately send someone like Michael an email that says, hey, Michael, you should cover my new toothpaste, or whatever it is. And you're like, okay, well, does that even, what about the toothpaste, is it, because if it's lifestyle, it's not you. If it's something about the business, maybe. But it's not really serving, that's when we're getting fast. It's the difference between, okay, we're going to have a quality relationship or quantities. And that's something for you guys to really look at inside your internal teams. And other times, there's breaking news. And you might just have to get a press release out. And that's necessary then. So that's kind of a way to look at it for yourself. Moving to number 3, this is all about the slowmoney.org principle number 3 is the 20th century was the era of buy low, sell high, and wealth now, philanthropy later. What one venture capitalist called the largest legal accumulation of wealth in history. The 21st century will be the era of nurture capital built around principles of carrying capacity, care of the commons, sense of place, and nonviolence. So, having your PR messages make a difference is really what this is. So what about that, Michael?
So can you read to me again what our translation was for this one?
Yeah, have your PR messages make a difference. And so this is really like impacting the community, right? I love this, right? It really is about carrying capacity, care of the common, sense of place, and nonviolence. I can see that also making an impact in the PR world.
It's this whole thing about adding value. If you have something new to add, if you have a new point of view to add, then adding value is something that you want to definitely sort of trump and make sure that you're doing. I guess the issue here is also about situationalism. If you're simply piling on and just adding another voice to something that's already been covered 1,000,000 times over, you're probably not doing your client the justice that this story deserves. If you can actually come into the news cycle, come into something in a way that brings a new perspective or some new information that isn't being reported, that your client can simply just get credit for. It doesn't have to be about your client, but it might be a story that's being reported and there's an angle to it that no one really has touched on yet that would really round out the story or bring the story back to the surface in a way that its past success as a story would continue to be leveraged going forward, and your client gets a little bit of credit for being the source that's quoted for that. Maybe it's a new statistic, maybe it's a study that came out that your organization didn't produce, but you're able to make a connection to it, and that's what you're leveraging it against. At the end of the day, what you want to be doing is bringing value to that story or to that news reporting cycle, and if you're just serving as a resource in a way that has already been done and you're just another voice doing the same thing, you're not adding value.
Yeah, and that really brings us to the next principle, which is really about investing in relationships. So the number 4 principle is we must learn, this is from Slow Money, we must learn to invest as if food, farms, and fertility mattered. We must connect investors to the places where they live, creating vital relationships and new sources of capital for small food enterprises. So in the PR translation is we, really learning to invest in relationships and the outcomes that benefit all components of the news reporting and consuming cycle. And this really goes back to how you're making a difference with the reporters that you're serving, but then also ultimately the public. And, I always joke and say, hey, I get up and make a difference with health, wealth, and love. Those are primarily the areas that I'm telling stories about. And when I see something on the Today Show like we did yesterday, hey, that's really great. So, Michael, what do you think about that?
Yeah, understanding who the end consumer is absolutely critical. And oftentimes I feel like the people that are working in the middle on the PR side are only thinking about who their client is, and they're looking at a reporting or a tracking sheet, and can they check off that they made contact, that they had contact with a journalist, that the story got published. They're not really thinking about the end result, which is how is this news and information actually going to be helpful, and again, how is it going to add value in the day in the life of the person that is actually going to be consuming it.
Right.
So thinking about that end user is really important to this whole process. And if you're only focused on your client and you're not focused on who I'm focused on, you may think I'm only focused on my editorial calendar. I've got to publish so many items a month or a week or a year. I'm focused on who is my reader. That's my customer. I have an employer, which might be the name of a magazine, but my customer ultimately is the person that chooses to read my content, who sends a letter into the editor at the magazine that I write for and raves about it or takes exception with it, or it's the person that's choosing to not only click and read online, but also registers as a return visitor because they actually are liking what I'm producing, what I'm writing, because it is adding value.
And that's really, so when you're seeing that type of action, then we're really seeing a movement made, which is really principle number 5. So from Slow Money, it's let us celebrate the new generation of entrepreneurs, consumers, and investors who are showing the way from making a killing to making a living. And the PR translation for that is, it's not just about the message, it's about the movement made. Are readers, listeners, and viewers inspired to take action?
Yeah, because ultimately that speaks to what we call conversion. And again, this kind of goes back to what I said before a little bit, in that it often seems that the person who's working in a PR capacity is only concerned about that tracking sheet, that report that they submit on a daily, weekly, or monthly basis back to their client that shows what the results were. And those results often tend to stop at, I made contact and a story was written. Well, what happens after that? That's just so important. And to kind of keep that in mind and recognize what kind of impact that's having on the consumer. Is this news and information something that someone actually can use, and is it being told in a way that makes sense from that standpoint? And it doesn't matter if it's a pitch about a new line of scarves or if it's a pitch about a new technology that's bringing water to the sub-Sahara desert. Is it adding value, and are you helping tell that story in a way that is ultimately going to flow appropriately through the entire supply chain of the news gathering and reporting process?
And that, and here's a great example with number 6. And then we actually talk about Paul Newman, who I'm a huge fan of Paul Newman, the organic line of products that he inspired. So I think it's a great example for many reasons. But number 6 principle is, Paul Newman said, in life we need to be a little like the farmer who puts back into the soil what he takes out. Recognizing the wisdom of these words, let us begin rebuilding our economy from the ground up, asking, number 1, what would the world be like if we invested 50% of our assets within 50 miles of where we live? 2, what if there were a new generation of companies that gave away 50% of their profits? And 3, what if there were 50% more organic matter in our soil 50 years from now? And the PR translation is, give more than you get in your PR relationships. And I want to ask you, that's where I'm going to bring in this personal example, Michael, but go ahead and say a little bit about that before I ask you the specific.
Yeah, it's I don't know if anyone has picked up recently on a sort of a meme that's flowing around the internet. There's a story that a couple of different news organizations have covered as well about marriage is not for you, and it's a write-up that a young man did where he translated the notion that marriage is not for you. It's actually for the person that you're married to. Marriage is you're giving a gift to somebody else and you're working for their success. You're not only marrying them, but you're marrying their family who might help in the raising of your children. And this article, because of the way that it's titled, has become a very interesting read, and it's gotten a lot of attention. I wouldn't be surprised if the person that wrote it already has a PR rep and maybe there's a book in the works. Mm-hmm. But the notion there, it really ties into this of giving more than you get. We often find that we benefit the most when we give the most, and when we give without expecting anything in return. And that's a very difficult concept for someone in a public relations role to sort of work within. Yet that is the facts of how it does work, because as we mentioned a number of times, if you're in a PR role, you cannot guarantee for your client coverage, and you can't sway me as a journalist to write about what you're pitching. So all you really can do is give more than you get, because the way the numbers are going to stack up on this is that you're going to be pitching, and you're giving a ton. But if you're doing it half-heartedly and you're doing it just as a part of process, because you have to show, okay, we did this many pitches and it resulted in this many placements. But if you're not, truly giving more than you get and really owning that concept and being a part of it and developing a relationship with somebody, I think back to the days when I owned an internet company and we were selling advertising. We had a number of people on our sales team that they'd get off the phone with someone they were trying to sell with. They'd slam the phone down. They'd turn to the guy or gal next to them and they'd say, "That Betsy, she doesn't know what she's missing out on." And already they're making her wrong for not advertising with us. And I would always point out that that's actually the wrong approach. We need to respect where the Betsies of the world are. We need to respect where the journalists of the world are who are not interested in covering our stories today, and work to educate them and spend time with them to come back around and learn about the story maybe from a different angle. In that way, you're giving more than you get initially, but the payoff may be somewhere else down the road. So if you hear from a journalist that, no, I'm not interested, and it happens 4 or 5 times, maybe it's time to just say, hey, listen, can we schedule some time a week from Thursday? Just 10 minutes. I'd like to learn more about your editorial calendar. That's actually giving more than you get. And there are hundreds of examples of that.
Well, one thing is, and we're going to now segue into questions, everybody. So if you have a question, please enter the question. Also, if you're learning something, #SlowPR, #media pitching. Here's what I want to bring up this example to get your opinion on, Michael. I totally, wholeheartedly agree with what you just said, and I also want to remind people that sometimes you're pitching something ahead of the curve of when it trends. And I remember years ago working with the Wall Street Journal on microfinancing. Now is something everybody knows about because Dr. Muhammad Yunus actually won the Nobel Prize, the Nobel Peace Prize for microlending around the world to developing countries. But when I was actually working with the organization, the nonprofit that he developed here in the States, and I'm pitching the Wall Street Journal, they told me, we don't cover that. And then, of course, the very next year they did cover that. So just to have grace where people are in their process, too, where you might actually be pitching something before it's time. And I often get off the phone and think, it's just not yet time. I need to rephrase this in a way that really works for the contact or the public mindset about what's talking. Here's a completely different example, though, one that I've been doing this for a long time, and I was just perplexed by this. And last time, you had said to me, you know what, you need to call that person's editor. Do you remember?
I do. Okay,
so I did due diligence, I'm not going to name names, and I'm not going to name the media venue's name. Very well known, this freelancer is top notch, okay? Appears in a lot of glossy magazines. And so when I gave more than I gave a lot. She's like, yeah, I want to use your client. So then I actually interviewed my client and got her briefing notes, and then sent her stuff, before the chat so she could stay organized and nice and all this. She loved it so much, she didn't even interview my client. She's like, I'm just going to use this. So, and then thanked me and said, listen, I'll let you know if they're going to use a photo or not. Well, after that piece, after saying that she would let me know about the photo, wouldn't respond to all my emails the past few weeks. So I got nervous because then you were like, it doesn't sound a little fishy. For sure, everybody's used, the email content that you've got, and that's not a problem. But then she just wouldn't call me back or email me back, right, which is really unusual. Usually when a media contact has agreed, it's not so much in the pitching process they might not get back to you, but once they've agreed to use your content, they'll at least even get back to you and say, oh, look, I couldn't use it or I could use it or something, right? So she's saying she could use it and then just falls off the face of the planet. And I just send like maybe an email once a week saying, hey, did you quote my client? What's happening? Because I like to repurpose that content, especially if it's good, to another contact. Didn't hear from her, so I called her and just left a message and said, hey, I got the nastiest email about calling her. And then I said, listen, the reason, I sent her another email after the call because she put me into voicemail. And I said, well, I was just really calling you because I don't really know what happened with that content, and I just wanted to give you a professional courtesy call before calling your editor based on the coaching you gave me, right? Oh, my gosh. She went off saying that I was threatening her and everything. And, and then she finally said, you know what, I didn't even use your material. And I'll bet when I see that magazine come out, I bet it's all those pointers and my client's not referenced, which has happened before, and I know it's part of the game. But from my side as a publicist, help us out, Michael. What can we do? What could I have done better here?
Well, I don't know that there's anything that you necessarily could have done better. I've been in this situation before myself from the particular freelancer side of the equation, where briefing notes came in, everything was perfect, didn't have time to do a phone interview, determined for myself that I was going to use it the way it was, looped back to let the PR rep know that, to thank them for the information they provided, and then something else just happens. Life happens. A new assignment comes along. The assignment that I thought I had, I actually don't have it anymore, and so I'm not able to use it. And there's just sort of things are snowballing. I have new deadlines coming up. But you're right. If there are repeated emails and even a voicemail message, that should be the kind of thing that that anyone who understands the relationship side of this business would respond to. And I've been caught in that situation myself. I think it probably depends on what the tone was and and sort of like how the message was shared with that particular journalist about before I contact your editor. If I were to, I'd probably react well if it came in and it said something like, hey, I've sent 5 or 6 messages, left a few voicemails, haven't heard back. I'm wondering if you're okay. I've stopped short of getting in touch with your editor at such and such just to check in on you. But because the last we spoke, it was at this point. Please do update me. If I don't hear back from you by 5 o'clock tomorrow, I'll probably just give Jane a call over at the magazine. Okay,
I can see where, because it's almost verbatim, but the piece that I was missing, and I think that everybody can learn from this, is that well-being piece. Like, are you okay? I haven't heard from you. Like, the benefit of the doubt. Like, I'm not being ignored, but maybe you're just too busy to get back to me, or maybe something has happened, right? So I can take responsibility for that. I could have added a little more love in the mix here. But it's just like dating, right? I was thinking about it, and I thought, oh my God, even though I've been married, for 10 years now, I feel like I was dating again, and I had a bad date with a guy, and he didn't call me, like it was all hot and heavy, and then all of a sudden I don't hear from him for 3 weeks. And it was like, I just started laughing. I'm like, oh my God, am I dating? It's just really funny that way. So anyway, hashtag slow PR, hashtag media pitching. The summary, that's what we've been talking about, fatal flaws of media pitching. We're talking about what is slow PR, what does this mean, how can you build relationships with media people, and what is this slow PR movement. I think you're going to be hearing more about it. It's something that's still fairly new. I've heard some other publicists talk about it, just like we talk about the slow food movement. And the slow movement is kind of like, in the face of us living so quickly. So what were the principles of slow PR is what we talked about. And again, if you're not already on PitchRate.com, pitch like I'm throwing a ball, and rate like I'm rating you with a star system, PitchRate.com, go ahead and join. It's free, doesn't cost anything, and you get to actually practice these principles live with actual journalists and producers looking for sources today. So that's something that I really encourage you to do. And then this last piece is how to contact Michael and myself. And so, of course, he's on his Twitter at Belicove. And if you want to email him, he's Michael, Mikal, at Belicove.com, and then his website. mikalbelicove.com. And so let me see. I really thank you so much for being with us, Mikal. And it's been just a pleasure the past 3 webinars. I mean, I personally, even though I've been doing this since I was 20, I've learned a lot from you. And really, from my heart, I'm really indebted to the insights that you've been willing to share with the public like you have.
Yeah, well, thanks for the opportunity. I think if there are 2 words that we can apply to the 16 fatal flaws and then to this whole concept of slow PR, it's that common thread that runs through almost everything that we've talked about over the 3 sessions, and that's being authentic and understanding the situational nature of what it is that you're doing and who you're interacting with. That's very, very difficult for someone in a PR role to do. PR, is often asked to, make something more out of what is really there. And there's this fine line where if you hire the right client, if you hire the client that understands that this takes time, that news placements don't just happen overnight, that there's a cultivation process that has to occur, that journalists and editors, they have to get to know your business and brand before they're just going to jump on board and deem you as being credible. There's a lot of work that we have to do beforehand. That work might revolve around messaging and positioning.
Right.
It might revolve around the look and feel of your brand online. There might involve media training before we can even do anything. But hiring that right client, someone who understands where PR lives in the real world, in the world where we care about authenticity and we respect the situational nature of news reporting. That to me is sort of the key of all this. If you're coming at it from the perspective where you have somebody who's unreasonable already as a client, their emotional intelligence around public relations or their expectations are far-flung, then you just have to deal with what you've got there. And in that particular case, in a sense, you're kind of lucky nowadays because journalism has become a bit of a commodity. There are so many news reporting outlets, including the ones that exist behind the 4 walls of the company if they just turn their own digital press on.
Correct.
So luckily, nowadays, it's actually easier to get coverage for the unreasonable client. But the coverage that counts, I believe, is always going to look to you as a PR professional to have a level of emotional intelligence around the news gathering process and a common understanding of how that works.
I just love that. And here's the thing, everybody, is that it's not rocket science, right? Just like the slow PR movement, you're going to look at the ingredients that go into your recipes in the kitchen. And if I'm going to be really making a meal for my friends, they're coming over, my friends and family, I'm going to have a product or the results of my food that are they correlate to the ingredients that I put in there. If I put in high quality, organic, foods that have been, really had some love put in there, I'm going to have that type of product at the end of my recipe. But if I go get some processed stuff, fast food stuff, that's what the product I'm going to have. There was one question coming from Germany that I want to address. Listen, he doesn't have any relationships in America, wants to know how to break into a new country. And there's so many different ways on the Internet. PitchRate.com is one of them. You're going to be, lots of journalists from around the world are using that system. And it's just like anything, like you would meet a person and build a relationship with them like you're in Germany, but they're in the States. If you guys have a common interest and you can fill a need for that other person, boom, you've got a relationship. And then there was just one last question before we end the call today, Mikal, about when introducing a new product, is it better to send a press release or a pitch? Well, I think that's really what we've been talking about too for 3 webinars, is like it depends. Depends on your strategy, depends on your contact, and depends on whether you're going to have, what kind of result. You're going to have fast food or slow food.
Yeah, there's no recipe for any of this. And there's if someone says to you, okay, it's a new product, You should always pick up the phone and call first. Oh, it's a new product? Oh, you should issue a press release, and you should send that in the body of an email. Oh, it's a new product? Oh, you should send a press release as an attachment in the email. There are no definites. There are no exact ways that this works. If you're in public relations and you're repping a brand that has a new product, you would assume that that brand or that business has hired you, in part, not only because of your knowledge of the news reporting and consuming cycle, but because of your relationships with editors and journalists. So it really isn't about, is it a new product, is it a re-release of an old product? It's not, that's really not the question that you should be asking in terms of how do I pitch that. The question you should be asking is, how do I pitch that? What's the story? What do I need to do to find where this adds value and link up with the right journalist or the right news reporting outlet to get this story out? Or do I actually start telling that story myself by turning on the digital press inside of the brand's four walls and gain some traction there first and foremost? It goes back to what's the goal, what's the strategy, what are the objectives, and then you get to the tactics.
You're just getting some love. Some people are writing in. So, Andy from Arizona, thanks so much. If you want to put that on social media, the love that you're sending us, we'd love to see it. Hashtag SlowPR, hashtag media pitching. And then the final question of the day is for you as a writer. So any tidbits on other freelancers who are out there looking to get more work? Any secrets that you want to share?
So there's a freelancer asking, how do you get more placements for your own stories?
Yeah.
That's an area that I really haven't focused on a lot in terms of helping other writers get placements. I would say first and foremost, I'm just talking off the cuff here, but build your own portfolio online. If you're not blogging, make sure that you are. And when I say blogging, I simply mean just self-publishing. So turning on a content management system like Blogger or WordPress and promoting your own content there, making sure that that you're going to local events where local media people are that are in decision-making positions, talking with corporations and businesses that because of content marketing are looking for great writers these days. Offering your services to nonprofits, building a portfolio that way, working yourself in from that perspective. Joining the Society for Professional Journalists, SPJ, and going to one of their regional events. They have many across the country. Would definitely make a lot of sense. I would sort of put those things together, and whether you're focusing on a particular niche or you're a general writer, network with the people that are in the publishing decision-making seats in the publications that you actually want to publish with. It's not going to be easy to break in because, again, it's become such a commodity. But if you're good content is always going to rise to the top.
So, and again, Rachel, thanks. There's a bunch of people just kind of like sending you love. It's been fabulous. Thank you so much. And, of course, Michael also loves it. Hashtag SlowPR, hashtag media pitching, and you can find him on Twitter and retweet things. Let him know and stay in touch, with both of us, not just Michael, but you can reach me at Twitter at Michelle Tennant, and then Wasabi Publicity, of course, and then I blog at storytellertothemedia.com. Thank you so much, Michael, for being with us. It's really been a pleasure.
Well, thanks for the opportunity to give back. I appreciate it as well.
I hope that we, and both of us, to all of you out there, that we have given more than we've gotten, because that's our commitment here in Slow PR, and hope that you've learned a little bit about media pitching today. Thanks again.
Thanks, everyone.